Hello friends, this is Dr. Pankaj Kumar, your mentor, and in today's sessions we will be talking about female reproductive system. So have a look at the diagram of the female reproductive system. You can see there the main structure is a ovary followed by fallopian tube. Then it goes to the uterus. Then we have a cervix. Below the cervix we have a vagina, and then the external genitalia, right? So we can divide the female reproductive system into two parts, what we call external genitalia and internal genitalia. So in case of external genitalia, we can say that vulva itself consists of labia majora, labia minora, mons pubis, clitoris, vestibules. Then we have a hymen, greater vestibular glands, breast, and as far as the main organ, that is ovaries or internal genitalia is concerned, it consists of ovaries, fallopian tube, uterus and vagina. Out of this, the most important is ovaries. We will discuss ovary in very detail. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about the female external genitalia. There is a erectile tissue that is present, and the erectile tissue is known as clitoris. Now clitoris is homologous to penis of the human, of the male. Okay. At the same time, there is a pair of Bartholin's glands present over there, right? So you can see in the diagram also. So here you can see the clitoris is there, and the pairs of Bartholin's gland or vestibular gland is present over here, right? So this is homologous to the bulbourethral gland of the male. So many a time this question has been asked. Bartholin's gland is homologous to the bulbourethral gland, and clitoris is homologous to the penis, right? Now let's talk about the female reproductive structures. We know very well that the gametes are going to be produced by ovaries, and it is connected to the uterus by ovarian ligaments. Now oviducts serve as a passage for ovaries to the uterus, right? And as far as the uterus is concerned, they lie horizontally positioned on the top of the bladder. Within the uterus, we see the internal lining, what we call endometrium, outer lining, what we call myometrium. The cervix is a muscular sphincter between uterus and vagina is a muscular structure that functions to receive the penis and also the birth canal. Okay, it opens between urethra and anus. So that is the relative position of the female reproductive structures, right? Let's talk about the ovary. You see, each ovary remains attached to the abdominal wall by a ligament called mesovarium. These are small rounded shaped structures covered by thick fibrous connective tissue capsule, and this is actually known as tunica albuginea. The ovary is solid. The blood vessels and nerve enter at hilus. The surface of tunica albuginea is covered with a cuboidal and germinal epithelium. Now ovary consists of two very much distinct regions, an outer cortex and inner medulla. The cortex is occupied by the development follicles and contains several hundred thousand of ova, whereas the medulla contains prominent blood vessels, nerves and scattered clusters of interstitial cells. So these are the things that is present within the ovary. Now let's talk about the ovarian follicles. Now the cortex contains different types of ovarian follicles, right? To begin with, the primordial follicle, the primary follicle, the secondary follicle and the Graafian follicles. The primordial follicles are identified via the single layer of squamous epithelium cells surrounding the oocytes. Okay. Now the oocyte is a large cell with a large nucleus containing a prominent nucleolus. Let's talk about the primary follicle. Now when the primordial follicle is situated, it becomes primary follicle. The oocyte enlarge and the follicular cell divide. The follicle has a two layer of follicular cells, is called as a primary follicle. Now within that, the cells continue to hypertrophy and proliferate to form many layers surrounding the oocyte. Eventually this become a granulosa cells. Okay, as you can see in the diagram. So this is what we call granulosa cells. Okay. Now a thick glycoprotein layer develops between the oocyte and the zona granulosa called the zona pellucida. Finally, the stroma around the follicle develops to form a capsule-like theca. Okay. Only one of the maturing follicles completes the maturation process each month, and the rest degenerate into atric follicles. Altogether, follicular maturation is going to take place 3 months. So it is very clear from the diagram as well. So this outer what we call theca folliculi cells, the stratum granulosum already we have discussed, and the centrally placed what we call oocyte. Now let's talk about the secondary follicle. The primary follicle eventually develops into a secondary follicle. The secondary follicle looks very similar to the primary follicle, except that they are large and they are most follicular cells, and there are small accumulation of fluid at the intracellular space called follicular fluid. These gradually coalesce to form antrum. Have a look at this diagram. So this is the primordial follicle. So it is getting converted into primary follicle. So in the primary follicle, we can say this, the basal lamina is actually coming over there. So it's a multilaminar primary follicle which eventually develop into secondary follicle. So in case of secondary follicle, what we see, the antrum, that is a very characteristic thing that going to appear. Okay. So the outer is theca interna. Okay. Outer is theca externa, and internal is theca interna, and there is granulosum cells that is present over there. Okay. But the most important thing is the formation of the antrum. That is the very characteristics of the secondary follicle. So we can see there the surrounding cells called the cumulus oophorus. This is the surrounding cells what we call cumulus oophorus. Okay. The surrounding theca differentiate into 2 layers, what we call theca interna and theca externa. And the androgens are converted into estrogen by the granulosa cells. Okay. So that is the entire structures about the secondary follicle. Now let's talk about the tertiary follicle. In case of tertiary follicle, what happens? If the secondary follicles survive, tertiary follicle or Graafian follicles are formed. Their identifying features is a fluid-filled cavity, what we call antral follicle. The oocyte lies at the edge in a mound made of granulosa epithelial cells, the cumulus oophorus, which we have seen in the previous diagram. In the meantime, it has grown so large that its cellular nucleus has attained the size of whole primordial follicle. Right? Now let's see the Graafian follicle. The secondary follicle will develop into Graafian follicle. The first meiotic division is now completed, and the oocyte is now a secondary oocyte, and it starts its second meiotic division. After the first meiotic division, most of the cytoplasm goes into one of the 2 daughter cells, and the other becomes the polar body, which is actually not visible. The follicular fluid fills a single space called the antrum, which is surrounded by follicular cells and the membrane granulosa. Now, if you see this entire structure, right, the centrally what we call oocyte, then oocyte is going to be covered by stratum granulosum. So this is the stratum granulosum. Okay. Have a look at this diagram. The internal structure what we call oocyte. Now the oocyte is surrounded by the layer what we call zona pellucida. Now this zona pellucida is again going to be surrounded by stratum granulosum. You can see there these are the layer what we call stratum granulosum. Then we have a theca interna. Then the outer layer what we call theca externa. And within this, what we can see there is a antral follicle. Right now we can see there. And this structure which is surrounding the oocyte, this is what we call cumulus oophorus. And the outermost, this layer that is covering the stratum granulosum layer, this is what we call basal lamina. So that is the structure, the entire Graafian follicle we see. Now let's talk about the corpus luteum. What happens after ovulation? The ruptured follicle join together and forms corpus luteum. The granulosa cell enlarge and become vesicular, and now they are called the granulosa lutein. Now they become highly folded. The space between the folds are lined between theca interna cells, which also enlarge and become glandular and now known as theca lutein cells. The zona granulosa cells begin to secrete progesterone. The corpus luteum also secrete estrogen and relaxin. Mind it, if the pregnancy does not occur, then the corpus luteum degenerate into corpus albicans and the level of estrogen and progesterone fall. Okay. However, if pregnancy occurs, then syncytiotrophoblasts of placenta release human choriogonadotropin and the corpus luteum persists, thereby it keep on secreting the progesterone. Okay. So about 20 primordial follicles start developing in each cycle, but only one make it. Right? Have a look at this diagram. So we have started with a primary follicle. Now these are the developing follicle. Now it goes to form secondary follicle. Now this is the Graafian follicles. Now it ruptures and the secondary oocyte is released. Now this is the corpus luteum. In the failure of pregnancy, what happens? It gets converted into corpus albicans. So this is the corpus albicans. Okay. Now let's talk about oogenesis. What happens that primordial germ cell multiply during fetal development. At the birth, ovary contains around about 4 lakh primordial follicles which contain primary oocytes. Mind it, primary oocyte is a diploid. So these primary oocytes remain arrested in the diplotene of prophase 1 of meiosis. So all females are born with a primary oocytes in which the cell is arrested at diplotene of prophase 1. At sexual maturity, what happens? FSH and LH help in the development of primordial follicle, and from diplotene the further development happens. Okay. And the further development and it happens and it goes to up to meiosis 2. And within the meiosis 2, again it get arrested at metaphase 2 when the ovulation is going to happen. Right? So when activated, the first meiotic division is completed. So now the primary follicles has matured in the secondary follicle. The second division then starts and a Graafian follicle is formed. This contains secondary oocytes. As I told you, the second division is arrested at metaphase 2. Okay. So at metaphase 2 stage, it is released during the ovulation. So this is how the oogenesis is going to happen. So at the secondary oocyte when it is released, it waits for the male so that male can contribute the centriole to complete its meiosis 2. Okay. So that is how the oogenesis is going to happen in case of the female reproductive system. I hope the concept is pretty clear at your end. So you can see all these things in the diagram as well. So you can see there that primary follicle getting into secondary follicle, then corpus luteum and corpus albicans. Okay. And this is how the development is going to occur in terms of the cell. That's all for the current session, right? Thank you.